Further ado, I'd like to introduce Danny Denton. A big round of applause.
Thank you.
So Danny is an Irish novelist. He's the former editor of The Stinging Fly, and he is a lecturer of creative writing at UCC. So this is Danny's second book, All Along the Echo. His first book was called The Earlie King and the Kid in Yellow, and that was published in 2018. I actually met Danny when that was published. He came into the bookshop where I was working on Grafton Street and gave a lot of us a copy of his book. So I wanted to interview him since then. And that book was nominated for the Newcomer of the Year at the Irish Book Awards. And then All Along the Echo, this one right here, was published in 2022. So it garnered amazing reviews. It was one of the best novels of 2022, according to The Telegraph. Max Porter called it an absolute marvel, and The Guardian called it a cyclone of a novel, which is a very good description of what it's like to read All Along the Echo. Danny, would you like to begin by just explaining to us the format of the book? Because I think that's quite pertinent, the radio.
Yeah, so it's a book about, it wasn't originally a book about a radio show, but it became a book about a radio show because I was trying to write a book about a character who was going through some stuff, but he was obsessed with the radio, and the more I wrote it, the more the radio leaked into it. So it's particularly talk radio, so like the stuff that is usually on from 9 to 12 in the morning on your local radio station, where people ring up and complain about an open sewer, or they are plugging their book, or whatever, various different forms of life taking place. So the form of the book very quickly took on this, it was all about the radio show. And so in terms of the structure, part of the book follows the producer of the radio show, parts of the book follow the presenter of the radio show, and then parts of the book are just the radio show. You get to read the transcripts, you get to listen more or less through your reading to the radio show as it's aired. And then there's an extra part of the book that I don't fully even understand myself, where two people are listening in and discussing the radio show, but they're kind of mysterious voices, and they communicate with each other on a shortwave radio. So it's all radio, basically. Is that good enough?
Yeah, it's very Beckett. They were my two favourite characters, these two unnamed voices who you don't know where they are or like how they know each other or what they're waiting for. Is big waiting for Godot vibes.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? Will they be found out? But yeah, would you like to talk to us a bit about Tony first? So he's the main character of the book. He's a DJ.
Tony is a radio DJ. He is he presents the Tony Cooney show, or Talk to Tony, I think it's sometimes called as well. He presents it. He's a middle-aged man with teenage kids. And his kind of job is like one of the things that really impresses me about these radio presenters is they're ventriloquists. They can sound like your best friend. They can sound like a school teacher admonishing you if if a caller says something dodgy or whatever. They can suddenly turn into this kind of admonisher. They can be politicians. They can be kind of parents. They can do every possible voice. When they're good, they can do every possible voice. So Tony is a little bit like that on air, but then when he's off air, he's getting increasingly nostalgic. And I remember reading that when nostalgia was first kind of talked about, it was an illness actually. It was talked about as an illness. So in my head, Tony kind of has this thing where he's losing himself further and further. Something that happens in the book triggers all these thoughts of when he lived in London and was in love for the first time. And so he's increasingly losing himself in the book to London, and all it was back then and what it meant to him and things like that. So on air, he's kind of this fantastic ventriloquist and extremely sure of himself, and off air, maybe not so much.
Yeah, that idea of nostalgia is really interesting in the book because so they've got this competition on the radio show, on Tony's show, where they're offering a car and a year's supply of petrol to somebody who's come home from London after these terrorist attacks that happen. And they launch this competition by driving around Ireland, and then they put in clues as to where they could be. But that idea of coming home and nostalgia is there. It kind of shimmers on the edge because you've got an influx of people who are coming back to Ireland and why did they leave and what are they coming back to. I think that's very interesting, and I wonder how much that informed kind of the whole premise of there being a terrorist attack in London and that recalling a lot of people back to Ireland.
Yeah, definitely. I have to say the terrorist attack was kind of anything in the book, it was the closest to a device where I was like, why would people want to come home? And I lived in London for 5 years and didn't come home for any fear of terrorism, but I do remember an increasing, after the Paris attacks, this increasing feeling when I was on the tube of anything could happen. Anything could happen. So somewhere in my mind that stayed, and when I thought, well, I want to have a car competition, and I want to have loads of London Irish flooding home. So what can I have happen? And that was my answer. But it's an interesting one. I didn't start thinking about it as a thematic thing. Like I would say from the off at these kind of events, you often have to kind of talk about your work as if you planned it or as if you meant it. But I certainly, as a writer, I don't write because I have something to prove. I don't even write because I have something to say. I think I write because I have questions. And so certainly in the early drafts of any project that I'm working on, it's just all an investigation, and things are coming to me, and I don't know why they're coming to me, and there's some intention there somewhere, maybe subconsciously. But certainly I had come back from London, and I had experience living away from Ireland and coming back periodically and seeing Ireland change. So I just kind of had a lot of this stuff going on. So Tony's nostalgia is probably my nostalgia for the stuff I loved in London. And then the depictions of Cork, Dublin, and Galway a little bit are maybe my feelings about Ireland as a person who was coming back all the time. And nostalgia, I don't know, like, yeah, I'm 40 next year and kind of getting older every year and thinking more and more about the past and all the things I don't remember and things like that. So all of these things are probably in the melting pot while I'm asking myself, why am I interested in Tony? Why am I interested in the radio? And so on and so forth.
Yeah, because there's a very good bit that when Tony sometimes you dip in and out of these conversations he has with different callers, and it reminds me a lot of listening to Joe Duffy when I was younger.
Joe Duffy was the one I should have said at the start, because everyone knows Joe Duffy. That's exactly what it is. Yeah, it's a version of Joe Duffy.
I was hearing like, talk to Joe when I was reading it.
Absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, so you get people calling in talking about every sort of thing. There's a little bit about the Irish language that I loved as well, and about why it's important to have cúpla focal. But then sometimes he kind of has these little sermons where he talks about, you know, the importance of coming home after being away and stuff, and what it would mean to someone to win this car and how hard it is. And I think it's really nicely peppered with the heartfelt, and then you've also just got Irish daytime radio where you're like, they're complaining about a roof.
Yeah.
Why are they giving the time of day for this?
But it was like, so again, like part of my personal stuff all feeds into this. I lived in London for 5 years, and then I met my wife in London. Neither of us were from London, and we kind of said, right, let's leave London. We were both kind of tired of the nature of London. And we said, let's leave, but let's not go. She's from Sheffield. We didn't want to go to Sheffield. We didn't want to come home to Ireland yet, or I didn't want to come home to Ireland yet. So we went and lived in Spain, or Catalonia, I should say Catalonia, for a year. And there was the first time where I kind of, where people didn't speak English regularly, you know. And so I found myself, and I didn't hang around, I hung around with Irish people lots in London as well. So I was like missing the Irish way of speaking, maybe not the Irish accent, but the Irish way of speaking English. And so I one day just said, I'll just tune into the radio for a bit. And I used to hate these shows, you know, these Joe Duffy, I used to absolutely hate them. Because why do you want to hear that stuff when that's the stuff that's going on in your head anyway, or just going on in your family? Everyone's kind of talking about the same stuff anyway, so why would you want to listen to it for entertainment? But there I was in a town called Girona, getting obsessed with this radio show, like listening to it every day. And my mum lived in a place called Cove at the time, and I would be ringing my mum on WhatsApp from Girona saying, there's a big sewage leak on your road. Be really careful driving home. And she was like, what are you, like, aren't you supposed to be cultured, like, you know? So it kind of grew out of that I was listening all of a sudden, and I was hearing a north side accent in Cork versus a south side accent versus a Kerry accent, and that became suddenly really important to me, like that. all these places were in the voices. It hadn't been my intention. My intention was pure, just trying to get a fix of Irishness or something, because I was feeling a bit isolated or whatever. But I started hearing all these places in the voices of the people, and then comparing that to when I used to fly home and I'd just be on the dual carriageway or a air coach or whatever else. That was really different. I wasn't in those places, you know.
So my confession, one of the reasons I love this book so much is that I listen to RTÉ Radio on every morning, and I live in London, so I know about the traffic in Dublin before I know what's happening in London. And I'll text my dad sometimes.
It's some comfort though, isn't it? It's such
so
a
lovely.
comfort.
And it's the same with Midwest Radio, because my family are all from Mayo, so I listen to that, and I'm like, they're listening to the death notices. And I'm like, oh, this is so comforting, reminds me of home.
Yeah,
and people in London are like, what are you doing? But there's something to be said for the radio, and I think that like it's such an interesting device in this book, because we in general have fallen away, I think, from listening to the radio as much. At least like my friends don't listen to the radio, whereas I think I'll be the last person listening to RTÉ in London. Like, come whatever.
It is absolutely... it's a miracle. Like when you think about because I didn't think of any of this, but when I started looking into it, I was like, well, I better research a little bit about radio. And when you just think about whatever radio shows on over there, broadcasting to the radio in the shop over there, those voices are flowing through us in some form, in radio waveform or whatever. It's amazing to think that our voices are just floating around in the ether. Yeah.
If you can only tap into it. Yeah.
If you can only tap into it, yeah.
I think, it'd be a good idea to read from a bit of it so people can get a sense of the radio. There was a section on page 29 that I really liked, and it's kind of describing the car competition. I was wondering if you wanted to read from that just to set it up for everyone.
So the on-air bit, Tony.
Yeah,
okay. I have to channel my Tony voice. Now... Oh, and what I'll do is, it's a transcript, so it's kind of, it looks like a radio kind of thing on it. So I'll say the names the first couple of times, but then it should become, actually it's mainly just Tony. Yeah, it should become clear anyways. Now, here's something completely different, and I mean completely different. You're going to be wrapped up in this now for the next month. You're going to be calling every relative and friend you know. You're going to be getting in touch with people you haven't seen for years, in places you haven't even been for years. Because over the next month, someone, somewhere in this wonderful country of ours, is going to win a brand new car. Yes! Starting next week, we're giving away to one lucky person, courtesy of Jerry Collins Motors, a brand new Mazda 2. Incredible! How would you like a brand new car? But it's not that simple, listener. Sure, who said winning a car would be simple? Jerry's been listening to us for yonks, a loyal listener but never called, he says. And he's been listening to the plight of the London Irish, the people coming home, the returned exiles, the people struggling to resettle, to find jobs and homes and to re-establish themselves. And between Jerry and ourselves, we've come up with a plan to help them. He wants to give one of them a car, to help them get back on their feet. Isn't Jerry just exactly the kind of man we need on the earth at this point in time? So myself and Lou will be travelling the length and breadth of Ireland every Friday for the next month, looking for returned exiles. And at the end of the month, we'll be giving one of them the very car we've been driving. Not only that, but each week there's a year's free petrol to be won too, courtesy of Circle K. A year's free petrol. Look, we've a lot of our people coming home in awful circumstances at the moment. And I'm sure listeners to the show will have heard many of their stories. I've heard them, I've felt them. And I lived in London myself for a long enough time, emigrating or immigrating or re-immigrating. Coming back is hard enough, but doing it under such strain, well, anything we can do to ease the burden. And producer Lou's in it with me. So who can win the car, Lou? Tony, any Irish person who's moved home because of the chaos in London can win the car. We'll set off every Friday and park up somewhere, and the first person to find the car will be the winner for that Friday. And they immediately win themselves a year's free petrol. We'll have 4 winners by the end of the month, and then out of those 4, the winner of the car will be chosen at random. And tell me, Lou, what are we asking Cork people to do? It feels sacrilege reading this now, Kerry. Say if the car doesn't end up in Cork on a particular Friday, for example. There are other counties after all, and it is a national competition. Yes, well, we understand that a person living in Cork might only have one chance to win the car, but maybe they have a relation somewhere else who has been displaced by the troubles in London. Maybe they know someone, an old friend or colleague, and they want to help. So maybe our listeners can spread the word once they hear what county we're in, and they can help someone win the car. The winner doesn't have to be a Corkonian, you know. My own dad is from Kerry, dare I say it. We'll forgive him that, I suppose. You totally set me up here, actually, didn't you? Now, our sister radio stations in Dublin and Galway will also be broadcasting this on our behalf, so for a month at least, the country will be united in its quest to find a happy owner for this brand new Mazda 2. And I'm damn sure there are Cork people living in all these counties, so let's try and make it so that we've 4 rebels in the car come that final Friday. Now, where are we going to next? Oh, yes. Stop there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Danny.
Absolute setup.
It wasn't a setup, I promise. I wanted to talk about Lou, though, and I thought that would be a good way to bring her in as well. So Lou is Tony's producer on the show, and something that I really enjoyed in this novel is that you've got the on-air, off-air voices, which you'll see when you read it, kind of the way it's laid out, but also they have very different personalities on air and off air. Mainly it's Tony, but also Lou she's kind of Tony's producer and accomplice, but then she's got her own things that are happening. How did you come up with Lou's character?
I think like Lou is around the same age as me. She's a lesbian and I'm not a lesbian. But other than that, I think a lot of what I was thinking and feeling might have gone into Lou, you know. And I did want one again, like a kind of every now and again you need to use a kind of a device. You need to think about your novel structurally or whatever. And I did think Tony was a very particular type of person. The type of person that quite often annoys me. And I thought he needs, on air she's a kind of sidekick, but he needs a foil who is quite different to him. And I found that originally she was just kind of an on-air foil. She'd come on and challenge him every now and again, or take up a different view when he was, say, waxing lyrical about something. She might come on and speak for the younger generation because she's in her kind of early 30s. But all of a sudden I just couldn't. Yeah, I was going with Lou everywhere. Lou she's in a relationship, and it feels like a solid relationship, but yet she's not. She's kind of got a job that she's really good at. She's got a partner that she loves, but she's still not really happy, and she's not really 100% sure why that is. So part of her kind of journey in the book is when I've achieved what I wanted to achieve, and I am where I am. Why am I not feeling satisfied? And they're also their cat is missing. So that I put the missing cat in, and then suddenly had all this reason to follow Lou wherever she was going, and she kind of became. She's a philosopher, like at heart, you know. Loads of us who did arts did philosophy and had no way to use it afterwards because you can't go and work anywhere with philosophy. But it definitely shapes the way I think and feel about the world and the way I approach ideas. But I mean, just things that happen, the way I approach them. So she's a real philosopher, and she kind of was. She's kind of the soul of the book in that sense for me, like that she is trying to figure things out. She's not accepting the way things are or the way she feels. She's always trying to question it and figure it out with mixed success, like as with all of us.
Yeah, it's kind of poignant. Yeah, I found the ending quite poignant with her. But I thought the cat was really interesting because it shows her partner Marta. She's completely obsessed by trying to find their cat, and kind of the difference between the two of them when they're speaking with each other about the cat. I think Lou is a bit more pragmatic, and she's like, the cat will turn up, whereas Marta's like, what if the cat never turns up? This will be the end. And then Lou has other things in her mind. She's thinking about starting a family and stuff, and they're not really seeing eye to eye on that. And I thought that the cat was an interesting device whereby you kind of see who finds what important as well in the relationship. I liked that.
Yeah, thanks.
And then I wanted to talk about Jada as well. She's the homeless teenager who's spray painting aero everywhere. Yeah, she was a really interesting character. Could you talk a bit about her? Yeah,
I don't know so much about her, but what I can say is I didn't have a name for ages. So I call her Jada, whatever. Eventually, but I lived in Cork City for a while when we came back from all those travels, and there's a tags like graffiti, but it's just a name. There loads of graffiti, loads of dereliction in Cork, and loads of graffiti. and there is this particular tag, Aero, like the bar, like the chocolate bar, and it's everywhere. And literally, like, you could pick up your glass and you'd see under your glass in Tipex, Aero. Like, it's unbelievable, on little door handles, gates, big ones on kind of walls with views and everything. And I got really interested in who Aero is just outside of writing. I was like, who is this? Like, this person is prolific. Whoever they are, they're everywhere. And there's something I really like. They give out about it on the radio, and I would give out about it if I owned the wall and someone probably sprayed their name all over my wall. But I really quite admired it. I was kind of thinking like that this is, whoever this person is, they want to make themselves heard and seen in this weirdly anonymous way. And so I knew I wanted to, like, I was writing about Aero before. I was writing about Aero when the first book came out, actually. I was interested in graffiti and tagging. And so I thought, like, there's someone going to be giving out about this on the radio, definitely. This is something to give out about. I was like, well, who is Aero? Like, wouldn't it be interesting to see who Aero is and what they might be like, and why they're doing it, kind of thing. And that's where I thought, what's the least likely? Because everyone will just assume it's a scumbag or something from the inner city or something. So I was like, what if I actually freshen up that idea? And it's a teenage girl. And there are, like, I'm sure, like Kerry in Cork, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who don't live in their own homes, being put up in B&Bs and things like that. And so I thought I would take a young girl, a teenage girl who is feeling completely and utterly disenfranchised, disavowed, the whole shebang. And she's staying in a hostel with her family. They're all in one room. And she goes out at night and sprays her name everywhere. And that's her kind of call, that's her cry, that's her call, you know. That's her way of feeling present and ownership in a place where she's kind of been completely let go.
Yeah, it gives her power, because then she is discussed on the radio.
And she does end up being discussed on the radio.
I think she hears it at one point. She's listening to it.
Yeah.
I liked that. And then there's another character called Anne as well. She's an elderly cancer patient, and she comes in now and then. And I feel like she's there in a way to make Tony look better, because Tony always has such kind things to say to her, and he comes across as this really decent talk show host whenever Anne's there, and he's like, Ash, you're great, Anne, you know, you're hanging in there with us and everything. Could you talk to us a bit about Anne and why you put her in there as well?
Anne is like, so one direct line I can draw is Anne couldn't have existed without John Moriarty, the North Kerry philosopher. I remember listening to him on Joe Duffy talking about what it was like to be dying of cancer. And he said something along the lines of, this isn't a quote, but maybe a paraphrase, he said something, there are two adventures. There's the love adventure and there's the death adventure, and I'm on the death adventure now, and I'm okay, like, you know, he almost sounded in pain, but almost excited. And I just was profoundly affected by that when I heard it. I don't know when it was now. When did he die? 2007 or something like that? Maybe. So that's a long time ago, and it stuck with me. But and that's something that radio is capable of. So I knew that I wanted the radio to be people giving out about silly things or very local minor things. But I wanted there are great moments of great profundity on the radio as well, and I wanted to reflect that somehow. And Anne started out as in the early days like she's mentioned at the start, and it was just this: we've got a cancer patient. She's checking in with us again. Still going strong, and it was like one page, and that was, say, the first or second draft of the book. There was one page, and that was just my thing. Like, I can show that, you know, serious things happen on the radio too, important things happen on the radio too, and every draft I added in more of Anne, just because she just became really interesting to me. This person who could have perspective in a really difficult, the end of her life, right? She's one way or the other, she's at the end of her life. Now she hangs on way longer than she should, which is good for her. But then my mother went into hospital at a certain time, and I had some experience of calling to the hospital late at night, and I thought, this is important, this feels important, and it's not something. I did end up wanting it to be a novel that tried to capture a place and voices in time. So, like, it doesn't have a huge plot really. Who's going to win the car? I guess might be part of a plot. Will they find the cat? But they're peripheral things. The central thing doesn't really have a plot or it never had a plot that I could discern or plan or write down. So I kind of it felt like important things should happen in all angles. Like it should be a book that captures a place and a time and voices in that place and time. So I kind of just ended up feeding more from Anne. But yeah, you just get to check in with Anne from time to time, and she's very. She's lovely, actually, isn't she? She's quite supportive of humankind, and she's nice. Yeah,
she brings a nice sensibility to it because Tony, the main character, he again on air he's all talk, and he has this wife who he refers to as the dancing queen when he's on air, but then you see off air what's actually happening, and he's maybe not so good a dad as you might be led to believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think Anne works well to kind of soften it. But just going back to what you're saying about there not really being a plot and it being more about kind of like the vernacular. I was so struck by the form of the novel because it just feels like such a multi-sensory experience reading it because there are noises coming from everywhere, and even on the page, there's one page where the typesetter must have had a field day, but they've actually got the graffiti.
A headache, I think.
But it's in the book, and it reminds me a bit of this book that I really like called Lanny by Max Porter, who quoted on your book, because he has a bit in it where he's conjuring up this sort of green spirit called Dead Papa Toothwort, and the words on the page curve across it and stuff. And I was wondering who you were drawing inspiration from when you were writing, because the form is just so unique. I wondered who was in your head.
Who was in my head? But certainly me and Max would kind of... our careers are a little bit intertwined. Mine much more so intertwined with his. Max published my first book. And when I went to him with my first book, I wanted it to be different on the page as well. I wanted, there were parts of a play in the first book, and I wanted them to read like play parts and stuff like that. And we wanted, in the first book, it rains all that, as in, I know it rains in Ireland all the time, and rains in Dingle more than most places, but it rained like Ireland had never seen the sun kind of thing, right? So it's kind of an alternate version of Ireland. And I wanted it to rain. I was saying, can we make it rain on the page? And he was like, we can see, and sure enough, it rains on the page. And so when Lanny came out, I was like, oh yeah, that's awesome, fair play. I'm trying to think where, I'm trying to buy myself time, basically, think where did it, because I wouldn't say I invented it or anything. Are there other books? I have a couple of old art books and things like that at home, and just the way those kind of things are put together maybe would be an influence, but I can't think of fiction that I kind of saw and said I want to do exactly that. I'm sure it's there though, because I didn't dream it up. I just wanted it to do that, I think.
I think when with the form of the book, the voices need to be so strong, so you have really captured that vernacular with what you're saying. Was when you used to listen to the radio a lot, people have such distinct voices in it, you hear where they're from immediately by their accents and stuff, which I think gives it so much structure.
Oh,
which
cool.
is good.
One of the disappointments was I can't do the accents. So then when I have to read the book, they just all sound like me. But there you go.
This is just a technical question, but at the beginning of the shortwave radios, they always say this line about how the sun rises and sets, or there's something that you repeat.
It's a line from the Rose of Tralee.
Is it? I didn't know what that was.
Yeah. The pale moon was rising above the green mountain. The sun was declining beneath the blue sea. That's based on numbers stations. Does anyone know what numbers stations are? Numbers stations are ways of the spies communicate since the First World War, and it's all on shortwave radios. And essentially, if you were a spy, you'd be given a code book. Mm-hmm. And the book would just be a number. I think they call it a numbers book as well. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But in that, you have a list of numbers, and they're matched randomly to letters. And if you were to hear a sequence of numbers on the radio, you could use your numbers book, and you could figure out what the message was. And that it's still in use today. Drug dealers, I think in Colombia or somewhere in South America, still use this system. But there's only one copy of that book, and only you have it. So if you're caught by the other side or whatever, and they find your numbers book, They don't know, they know the code, but they don't know what to listen to break the code. So primarily out of Russia, like Russia were the best at it, and probably still are the best at it. They would broadcast shortwave radio, and obviously shortwave radio travels really, really far, can travel over the horizon. And the way you would know there was a message for you was a particular sound or song would play. And so you might just get a little bit of a jingle, and then you'd get 5, 4, 7, 2, and you would know that that was for you. So you would be tuning into the radio wherever you were in Berlin or London or whatever, and you have your message. And so I used to send messages the same way. But in my head, these two mysterious characters are broadcasting on a numbers station, but they're not spies anymore. They're just chatting. They're just chatting. So one of them has to at the start. That's why it kind of, if I can pull it back up, that's why he always starts with, so it always starts with 9, 5, 7, 2, broadcasting, and then he just starts, anyway, how are you these days, you know? But it had to start with, it always has to start with the sound signature so that you know that it's for you. Yeah. And I really like that song, The Rose of Tralee. I couldn't necessarily endorse the festival. That's for everyone's own, that's your own thing to decide whether you like it or not. But I really like the song, and the John McCormack singing it. So I thought that's what it would be. So that's what that is. Yeah.
And why did you put those two voices in?
No idea. No
Great
idea.
Answer.
What I will say is they weren't in it for the first. The novel is about 9 drafts probably. I kind of stopped counting at the point that you kind of get a publisher and you start editing with him. But maybe 9, maybe 10 drafts, and about definitely not the first 5. They're not in there. And then when I was writing, say, the 6th draft, this kind of, we all have a voice of doubt in our heads that kind of says, like, you're never going to run the 10K, like, you're never going to do this, you're never going to, I think some people call it the superego or whatever, the voice of doubt. I was writing, and the writers have plenty of that voice, and whatever I was writing at a certain point, this voice man was like, readers are never ever going to buy that this is happening in London and that this many people are going home, like, it's just a stupid idea. And then other little doubts. People are never going to be. You could never write a lesbian because you don't know what it's like to be. Oh shit. Okay, right. And I never did this before, but my solution was I'll write that voice into the draft and I'll just delete it at the end, because once you acknowledge those voices, they usually go away. If you challenge them or acknowledge them, they go away. So I'll just put them in italics and just stick it there. And so I just did that. And that was my way of, I could immediately, okay, yeah, you've said your piece, I'm moving on now, I'm going to carry on writing my book or editing my book. And then at the end, when I got to the end, then my kind of method is things are handwritten first, then they're typed up, then I print it out, and then I'm handwriting in on top of handwriting the edits. And when I was going back through it to type up the edits, I was like, instead of deleting it, I was writing a response to it. So it started as this kind of two voices in my head arguing with each other, and there was no radio involved, and then eventually they started trying to make each other laugh, and then one kind of got sad, and the other one was kind of I was like, oh, these two voices are friends. I don't know what's in my head anymore. Now promise I'm fairly normal outside of this room. But it just became this thing then and then again the explorer or the investigator in me was like, why are they there? What can they contribute to this thing now? And that they then became a way of. They started out as kind of Waldorf and Staten, if anyone remembers the two guys in the up in the box. But they finished up as kind of like that. They had characters of their own, and actually I like them most of everyone in the novel. I like those two. I have my own ideas about who they are, but I'm not going to say that because I'm not really sure. And I really genuinely mean that. That's not a thing. I think it's possible that you could read them different ways. Yeah. But yeah.
I do really like them. Yeah, I think it's interesting as well how you construct a whole character around them, and all you hear is, I'd say there's maybe like 12 pages on them in the whole book.
Yeah.
Your head goes mad thinking who they might be and kind of imagining them and stuff. Yeah, I wonder if you do one more reading.
Absolutely.
There's a bit I really like on page 175, and that was more to give a sense of the form of the novel, which I thought might be good to read out.
Oh, it's these two.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. That's the 175 you have, right?
Yeah,
just in case you're reading the proof or something.
Yep.
Yeah. So I won't sing the. So yeah, broadcasting simultaneously on 5,264 kilohertz and 1,420 megahertz. If anybody's ever heard of the Big Ear, strange signal from space in the 70s, there's a little Easter egg for you in those frequencies. The pale moon was rising above the Green Mountain. The sun was declining beneath this blue sea. And the first voice speaks out of static. 3, 2, 5, 2. I hear these things. I see them. I write them down. This level of conjuring, there are, of course, times that you approach a sort of God complex yourself. Like maybe the whole lot of this is only happening in your head, but somewhere it could all be real. All happening. First voice again. But then, would God or Jesus or Buddha or whoever have a Che Guevara poster on their bedroom wall? A black Argos coffee table? About 311 DVDs? The Head and Shoulders, the Radox shower gel with the broken cap? A stack of half-filled writing pads? A cup full of half-wasted pens and blunt pencils? A plastic dish rack warped from the years, a few fridge magnets that were presents once, from those who were friends once, a corner medicine cabinet, chock-a-block with half-finished blisters of Lexapro. First voice again. Would God listen to the radio obsessively, and the radio playback too, the same shows over and over again? I lie if I say I listen only at certain times. Would God broadcast her own musings? And was God's childhood dream live in home store and more on the Kinsale roundabout for a year, sleeping on a different bed each night, lounging on a different couch each day while the weather went on about its own business outside? First voice again. The strangest thing when you died, because we were just talking to each other, just chatting like normal, like this. But when it came to parting, you said, look, realistically, this could be it. If we're honest with each other, we might not see each other again. Of course, I was unreliable then, and you were very far gone yourself. I know, I said, and I knew. I knew I wouldn't see you alive again. And you said, you know I love you, right? I don't think we ever said that in all the years we knew each other, but it was always obvious to me. And I said, I know. I love you too. And we just hugged gently because you were very weak then and said goodbye, just like that. I have an image of turning away, not seeing your face a last time. And the second voice says, the strangest thing that, you know, whatever we are, wherever we are, whoever we are, the mind is just not large enough to contain itself. So here we are then. And the first voice says, here we are. And the second voice says, two souls on the same frequency at the same time, more or less. The first voice says, two souls out here in the void, in self-isolation, I suppose. Ha ha. It's safer here on the frequency, don't you think? You don't have to do all that living. God knows. And sure, what's living? Only dying in slow motion. Hush, hush, here comes another one. And then we go back into Lou's story or someone else's story.
That's one of my favourite quotes from the whole book. It's heavily underlined.
I've never read that before, actually. It's quite emotional.
I really like it. I will open the floor up to questions in about 5 minutes, so just think of your questions. But there's one I wanted to ask you, Danny, which is, when I was doing some research for this, I read an article you wrote for Granta about kind of the writing process and stuff, and you were talking about the importance of presence and being present in your writing and how a lot of writers are maybe doing that. And I think it fits that your book is so immediate and like multisensory. Is that something that you thought about a lot when you were writing this, about like really trying to just get the present moment into the book? And does radio help with that as well in the form?
Yeah, like radio is an interesting way of doing it. Like that, it wasn't that I thought loads of writers weren't doing it, but I was spending a lot of time working with, say, new writers, people who were just starting to write and things like that. And and I did this myself at the start. When you start writing, I think, or a generalization I can make, and then I'm sure there are a million exceptions, but when I started writing, or when a person starts writing, especially if it's like literary fiction, you read loads of literary fiction and you want to sound like the people you like, right? So like John McGahern would have been a big one for me. I love John McGahern's work. And when I started writing, I kind of wanted to sound like him. And so I started to write like I thought it should sound as literary fiction. And what that means is sometimes like you're writing in a very kind of not dull and lifeless, but a clipped, short way, like a way that there's not too much emotion, lots of control. And that was the type of literary fiction I kind of wanted to write. And I was trying to not write like John, I wasn't copying John McGahern exactly. I'm sure I was influenced by him, but I wanted to match that kind of style, that control. And I was never actually thinking about, like, I was writing about a room on the side of a chapel in Dingle, and I was just writing what I thought it should sound like in a book. I was never actually thinking about what's it like to actually be in that room. What does it smell like? What does it sound like? And so that's where the kind of being present thing came in. It was kind of, later on I was like, I need to forget that this is fiction. I need to put myself in the place, like imagine it, put myself there. What can I hear? And this goes back to almost like latter stages of primary school when you're told you're setting a scene. You use sensory language. What can you smell? What can you hear? What can you see? And so it just became about that kind of really trying to be present in the imaginative space so that I could do a proper job of it. So my hope now is when people are reading my work, they're not reading me telling them what something was like. Hopefully I'm dropping them there and they're seeing it and hearing it and smelling it and everything for themselves. And it's up to them to decide what it was like or what it's like. So that's kind of where that came from. And then that was easy to do in the first, well, not easy, but it was straightforward to do in the first book because I was inventing a version of Ireland that didn't exist, and I could just drop them in there and tell them what it smelled like, what it looked like. I could tell them what the rain sounded like, what it made things look like, what they could hear. But with this book, it was a real place, and I was kind of increasingly interested in a large part of the novel is Tony and Lou on dual carriageways in Circle K's. That's not that thrilling to read about, right? So it was interesting for me this time. It was a bit more challenging because I'm like, I really want the reader to feel present at all times, but the places aren't going to be that vibrant and interesting. Sometimes the places are going to be quite dull. So I need to kind of sometimes ramp it up or sometimes figure out other ways. And I had a nice break. I sent them to Connemara at one point, and that was almost to give myself a break from that because Connemara is obviously amazing. And there's a million things you can feel and hear and smell in Connemara, so that was much easier to do.
It's almost like you took a writing experiment or like a practice and then pushed it to the extreme because you were like, okay, let's strip place out of it completely and just have voices and see if you can conjure up all of those extra things, build a room, so to speak, when you can just hear a person's voice on the radio.
Yeah. And that's kind of like, it was a nice challenge as well, though, because like you mentioned accents earlier and stuff, like people speaking in different ways, that's what I had to get like fully accurate. I didn't have to tell them that this was a regional person or this fella in his Dingle accent or whatever. I had to kind of just try and nail it on the page, like, so yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah.
But is that something you were aware? I mean, I know you write very instinctively, and of course that's the way to go about creatively, but are you aware that it struck me that sense of nostalgia and being out of Ireland and even that John Moriarty thing as well, of love, where the focus are is it a writing out itself? Are you aware of that?
I'm not. No, like I am, and I am, and I amn't. I'm not aware of the psychological kind of textbook ideas behind it. But even as you're speaking there, the way I would phrase it in the way I maybe was thinking about this novel is, everyone has a story to tell, right? And all we're doing the whole time, in my opinion, all we're doing the whole time in our lives is trying to tell other people the story of ourselves, and we're trying to tell ourselves the story of ourselves. So I'm 40 years old. I still really don't know who I am. I know the roles that I play, and I know, but I still, you spend so long trying to figure out who you want to be that you never really stop and kind of go, who am I, right now? Or your life seems to be this quest towards things, but all the time you're just this self. You're generating yourself all the time. You're generating selfhood all every day. And that could be ringing up the radio to complain about something or to express your political views. It could be tagging a wall. It could be sitting down and telling someone in great detail about your first love when you lived in London. There's a million ways, and for me, maybe it could be writing down a book. Like the things I've mentioned that kind of come from my life into the book, I think that's just a normal, a writer. Things your daily experience will feed into it. I definitely wasn't writing the book thinking, what's been my experience and how do I get that down or anything. It was more kind of we had a cat that went missing, so I was like, I can definitely use that. I know about that. It was more, that was kind of more magpie-ish than kind of introspective. But I do think all those things are going on, and definitely part of even when I was kind of pitching this to my agent, I was kind of I'm trying to make it just about the stories we tell to continue, not to survive, because it's just, I don't think it's that, I don't think it's like a need to survive. It's more just as we continue to survive, we constantly generate stories, stories of our family, stories of our society. I'm a big JA fan, and that's one of the richest places for folklore in the 21st century, in terms of he carried the whole team on his back. You don't use that kind of language in the office at work, you kind of, you're already mythologizing, and self-mythologizing is going on all the time. So I think there is, definitely, if I sat down with a Jungian, I'm sure they could explain to me exactly how I put that in Jungian terms. I think it's going on, but not as purposeful as that either. Does that answer the question more? Yeah.
Would you say it's a book about writing as well, or your exploration into the matters of literature?
No, I don't think. Well, not to me. To me, it wasn't. I have to do for part of my job. I've promised to do a PhD, and I have to talk about the books in that way. So I think it will become that soon. But when I was writing it, I wasn't really reflecting on the writing process so much. I was just trying every day to kind of. For me, it's trying to be as loose and free as possible, so that when you sit down, anything can happen. Because I think then, if anything happens on the page, then you can get it right later, right? You can fix it up and make it publishable and make it not perfect, but as close as you can get. But if I sit down and I think, right, today I have to write in this type of way, and my intention is to draw out the Jungian nature of this scene, I'm goosed. I can't do me personally. I can't do that.
Yes, would you like to ask a question?
Just wondering, do you imagine physically, so for example, I'm from Galway, and the local station is Galway FM.
Yeah, Keith Finnegan.
Yes. So there's a character in this who monitors the traffic at different times of different days.
Yes.
To get a traffic report. Now, I never met this guy, but from listening to the course, I imagined him physically. Created this person, his voice. I knew other presenters because I've met them socially, but this guy had eluded me socially, right? So I hadn't listened to him on good weather, bad weather, negotiating traffic, giving out about pedestrians, giving out about cyclists. I formed a physical picture of this man. To my horror, I was on my way to a wedding, and the guy who's driving me said, weren't you trying to find out about this Johnny? And I said, yeah. And there he was. My world collapsed. Absolutely nothing like I imagined him to do at all. So I'm just wondering, I'm visualizing your 15-year-old teenager. I'm visualizing the two girls who are lesbians. I'm visualizing them. But do you see them physically before you create them, or does the physical person connect to the other? Is it relevant?
It can be mixed. I couldn't tell you what Lou looks like. Not a clue. in my head, she's just a vague outline. I can tell you what I think Tony looks like, and I think he has. I know he has a comb over. It was important. It was important to me. It was important to me that the wind would. They'd both have different experiences with the wind, and Lou's thing would be trying to stop her hair from getting ruined by the wind. Not ruined, but like trying to keep it down, and then just letting it go and letting the wind absolutely wreak havoc with her hair and just leaving it. And Tony's thing would be that he'd be looking out a window and the wind would suddenly lift the comb over off to reveal his lovely big bald head. So I kind of knew what Tony looked like, but I never knew what Lou looked like. Jada, again, vague outline. It's not, in this project, it wasn't that important to me. I'm trying to think, I don't think the physical characteristics of the characters often mean that much to me, actually. Unless something becomes useful like that, like I want their hair to do that, but I wouldn't be too...
You're characterising Trump. I mean, I saw that as 2-second videos walking somewhere, slightly bent over, and the wind pushed it of whatever he has on his sliding roof, as we call it. You know, and I thought it was an exposed caution,
Yeah.
etc. I remember listening to Emma Thompson in an interview, and she said Donald Trump had run her up in her trailer to ask her out to dinner, and she didn't even know that there had been a phone or how he got her number. That was grand. So she said, she'd been into it, said, well, would you have gone? She said, the only reason I would have gone is because I could have been, and then she leant over to her, and then she said, we all know.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
So we've got time for one more question, if there's one more there. No? Okay.
We found the cat. Yeah. We found the cat. In the most unbelievable, we don't have time now, in the most unbelievable circumstances. It was an actual miracle. Yeah.
And thank you so much, Danny. That was a brilliant event.
Thank you
Really
very much.
fascinating.
Thank you, Leanne.
I just want to say thank you very much to a few people. So to the Arts Council, Kerry County Council, First na Gaeltachta, Ali na Gaeltachta, and our associate sponsor, Dingle Distillery, and of course on G-Shirt. And the founders and the volunteers are all integral to this festival happening. So thank you all very much for joining us. There will be copies of Danny's book for sale just in the bookshop next door. And if Danny has time, he will sign them.
Of course, yeah,
yes.
of course.
Okay,
yeah,
so thank you all so much.
absolutely. Thank you.
The 3 next events as well, by the way, is Elizabeth Boyle and, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank.
Someone said, yeah. Jane.
Oh yeah, Shane Kwan. They'll be interviewed by Sean Hewitt and then Niamh Campbell. Thank you very much. And that's at 1:30, so you have time for a coffee.